That reminds me of Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. That's one of my favorite books. Another one is Jonathan Livingston Seagull, right? These are all really powerful books that talk about that concept of personal disruption. And now everybody talks about change and how change is good for you and why personal disruption is actually something that rejuvenates you. But in your book, what you described for personal disruption is actually gut wrenching. Why is it so hard for individuals? Why don't we see everybody taking the leap towards inventing and disrupting themselves?
Mm. Yeah, I love the word gut wrenching because that really is what happens. So, whenever you disrupt yourself, you are making a decision to, let me put it in more visual terms. So, if you think about disrupting yourself and you think about a piece of graph paper, you've got the y-axis and you've got the x-axis. And when you're on the y-axis, and let's say you're at a 12. And when you make the decision, you're sort of going over one, up one, over one, up one on the graph paper of your existence. But when you make the decision to disrupt yourself, you are choosing to go down that y-axis from a 12 to a 10 or a 9. And that is very difficult because we in our society and we as human beings are about forward movement. We want to make progress. So even though we know that in the future, that step back will be over one up two or over one up four or over one up eight. So in the long run, we will be better off. In that present moment, because we are so focused on forward movement, it is very difficult to feel as if we are killing off a piece of ourselves. So the price of a new self is our old self. And so when you move from 12 to 10, when you disrupt yourself, that is a very difficult thing to do because we want to focus on forward movement. So that's the challenge. That's the dilemma, because at the same time, we know that if we won't disrupt ourselves, if we won't make that decision to grow and develop, we also will die inside a little bit. This plateau that we think we're on can become a precipice. And so that's the dilemma. And that's why I love the innovator's dilemma, but it also applies to us as individuals. We know that if we don't make progress, we can fall, but we also know that if we do make progress, it's going to be painful in the short term.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know what you've written in your book on embracing the constraints in order to make this pivot, embracing these constraints to disrupt yourself, right? That really resonated with me because I'm an immigrant, right? Born and brought up in Bombay in India. Every step of the way, I have had to embrace the constraints and actually use it as an accelerant for growth, from understanding new cultures to building new personal and professional relationships, right? But how can leaders make constraints work for them? When faced with the constraint, how can they change the I cannot because to I can if?
Well, I think a good place to start, and you've already framed this up, Shivani, is when we start making progress along the trajectory and we're moving forward, we think if only I had enough time, or I had more money, I had more resources, I had more acumen, whatever it is, we think then I could really make progress. And yet, if we look at our lives, we will recognize that anything meaningful that we have ever accomplished involved constraints, even if it's something simple. I mean, you described immigrating, but think about school. I remember someone saying once that whoever finishes courses where they're just auditing the course, they don't finish the course. We make progress in school because we have the constraint of you've got a semester or you've got a quarter and you need to take a test. And if you don't take the test, you won't get a good grade or you won't get a grade at all. And so anything meaningful in our lives we have accomplished because we didn't have enough time. We didn't have enough money. We didn't have enough resources overall. And so I think a starting point is to recognize that whatever we feel like we don't have enough of may be the very thing that we we need in order to create, the very thing that we need in order to make progress. And you mentioned this idea of, or your experience of being an immigrant. I had a fascinating or did this analysis a few years ago, and I was looking at my podcast guests and I thought, wow, I'm really over indexing on immigrants. What is going on? And then I realized, oh, the reason I'm over indexing is because immigrants know how to disrupt themselves. Muscle is built. Either whether you did it yourself or you are the parents of immigrants, you have a very well developed personal disruption muscle. And so for you then to translate that into business, into academia, whatever it is, it becomes very easy to do because the muscle is already there.
I love the concept of a personal development muscle, right? Personal disruption muscle.